Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ellison Barber in for Gadi Schwartz, coming to you from New York. Here are some of the stories we are watching tonight, starting with Donald Trump telling anyone who will listen that he just might be on the verge of facing a third criminal indictment.
We have yet again another example of Joe Biden's weaponized Department of Justice targeting his top political opponent, Donald Trump.
Republican leaders were quick to defend the former president after Trump says he got a letter from special counsel Jack Smith saying he's the target of their investigation. Plus, with record-setting temperatures being set across 3 continents, the heat is increasingly hard to escape.
This year, I can tell you, it's a lot more harder than other years.
A U.S. soldier has been taken into custody by North Korea. What happens now, considering the two countries have no formal diplomatic relations? And while Gen Zers may be obsessed with TikTok, a more mature generation is trying to give them a run for their money.
Do you remember when you first heard about TikTok?
I thought it was so crazy. I'm going, why are people so drawn to, people dancing and doing silly things?
Tonight, a third indictment for President Trump might be on the way, and that's not only us saying it. He is saying so himself. We just heard from the former president moments ago as he made an unscheduled campaign stop in Iowa, where he will be taking part in a Fox News town hall. And these are his first public remarks since the DOJ sent his team a target letter. Listen.
I didn't know practically what a subpoena was and grand juries and all of this. Now I'm like becoming an expert. I have no choice because we have to. It's a disgrace. If you say something about an election, they want to put you in jail for the rest of your life. It's a disgrace. So they can cheat on an election, but if somebody wants to question the cheating, they want to call you a conspiracy theorist and all these other things. These people are sick.
We do want to reiterate absolutely no evidence of election fraud has been proven. Now, moving on to this target letter, it is all connected to the former president's alleged role in trying to overturn the 2020 election and subsequently causing the January 6th riot. Trump posted all about it on his Truth Social account earlier today, first calling special counsel Jack Smith deranged, and then going on to say he has been given a, quote, very short 4 days to report to the grand jury, which almost always means an arrest and an indictment. We'll get into more of what a target letter is in just a moment. We do know this, though. Trump received a similar target letter on May 19th, and that one was in relation to the classified documents probe. He was indicted about 3 weeks later. So if that is an indicator at all, the clock could be ticking. Joining me now is NBC News Now anchor and senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson and MSNBC legal analyst and former U.S. attorney Barbara McQuade. Hallie Jackson, to you first. Tell us, what do you make of the remarks we just heard from the former president? They say this was an unscheduled stop. How unscheduled was it? I mean, do we think he just decided to do this in light of what happened with that target letter?
Let me take that in a couple of pieces. The stop that he did was called, in like the parlance, as you know, Ellison, of like campaign embed reporters, and OTR, meaning it's not like officially scheduled. He is the former president, so there is some level, you would think, of just security that has to be put in place for something like this to happen. Without even getting into that piece of it, though, this is not unusual for Donald Trump or for any presidential candidate to make a stop on the campaign trail that wasn't on kind of the official list. This was in front of a group of Republican county officials in, I believe, Lynn County. He stopped in Cedar Rapids, chatted with them. The town hall for Fox is going to air later tonight. That's sort of the background there. What do I make of what his remarks are? Listen, not super surprising. I will tell you that I was listening for a piece of news, and I was listening to see whether he would make news on something you just talked about, Ellison, whether or not he would appear in front of the grand jury. He's been called there, he says, in 4 short days. So is he going to go? Presumably not. Presumably his attorneys, and Barbara can speak to this, would advise him not to do that because of the possibility he could say something self-incriminating. But I'd like to hear that from Donald Trump himself. We are learning now from the pool reporter traveling with him, meaning the representative of the rest of the media that goes with any former president, or in this case, Donald Trump, to an event like this. He was asked. He did not answer that question. He instead simply said the comment that you phrase, and I think it's important that we note that even though he says essentially he was just asking questions about the so-called cheating. There is no evidence of widespread fraud in the 2020 election. It was a legitimate election. And the thing that Donald Trump is potentially going to be accused of doing here, based on what we know from what he says about this target letter, could have something to do with this scheme broadly to seek to overturn the election results in 2020, interference on that front. Remember, Jack Smith, the special counsel here, is not simply only looking into the attack on the Capitol. He is looking into a whole slew of things related to election interference, Ellison.
So, Hallie, before we get into all the legalese as it relates to this particular case, let's take a step back. And can you remind us what this particular investigation entails? Because there are a lot of them in different states, and it can be tricky to keep track.
Yeah, this is federal, right? So this is like a national thing. This is not a state-level thing like we've seen in, for example, Georgia, like we're seeing in some other states. Let me just say it in two. If you're going to shorthand it, if you're out with your friends or your family and you're talking about this, election interference. That's how I would sort of broadly categorize this, right? A plot to mess with the 2020 election, a plot to mess with the results of the election. That incorporates a whole bunch of things, right? So it includes, for example, potentially the attack at the Capitol, the insurrection, and Donald Trump's incitement of his supporters there. That is something we could see involved in potential charges that could come down. It might involve this investigation, the so-called fake electors scheme. What is that? That's putting in place a group of people kind of made up to go and say, hey, actually here, Donald Trump won my state, when actually it was Joe Biden who won that state, right? There's a whole bunch of state-level investigations going on into so-called fake electors. That's something that's a part of this here. It could involve other things. We don't know, like conspiracy, et cetera. There's a lot of different arms to this, but it's under that blanket, I think, of like 2020 election interference. That is different and distinct, Ellison, from the other piece of the investigation that the special counsel is running, related to classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. That's like another bucket. Same people doing the investigation. Jack Smith is still running it. Two different buckets in there.
Okay, so Barbara, let's stick with Hallie's theme of you're out with friends talking about this. If you're out with friends who do not have a law degree, how do you explain to them what a target letter is? And in terms of the timing here, are target letters usually sent in the early stages of an investigation, or is that something that only comes at the end if charges are imminent?
A target letter comes usually at some point after which the grand jury has been convened and the investigation has matured to a point where they have determined that someone is a putative defendant. So ordinarily, when a grand jury begins its work, it is looking at crimes, not people. But as the investigation continues and it comes into focus, they identify people they are likely to indict. And that's when somebody might get a target letter. And it's actually an invitation that says, if you would like to come tell your side of the story, we'd like to hear it, because we're kind of thinking you're going to be a defendant. We're going to charge you. But if you'd like to come in and tell your side of the story, we'd love to hear it. Now, it also brings with it an advice of rights, that you have an absolute right not to testify against yourself. And so it is rare that a defendant, a putative defendant, a target, accepts that invitation and goes in, because what's more likely is they're going to go in and say things that can be used against them. So I think it does signal that the end is near in this case. I think that Jack Smith, in this case, would send a target letter and want to talk to Donald Trump only after he believes he has talked to every other witness he would want to talk to. He's reviewed every document he would want to review, and he is as armed with the facts as he possibly can be so that he could confront Donald Trump with any of those facts if he should try to wiggle out of them. And so it appears that he's given him 4 days, and if Donald Trump wants to avail himself of this opportunity, he can say yes. More likely than not, he'll decline, and then I would expect that an indictment will follow in short order.
Hallie, this Truth Social post, it sort of seems like a play from Trump's playbook of moves when there's any sort of indictment or trial sort of thing. He puts the information out before people involved in the case actually do. Has the DOJ publicly commented on this at all?
No, not to this point, and it is unlikely that we would see that, just given the sort of veil of secrecy that surrounds this kind of thing, until there is something filed in court, for example. That's what we saw last time around, was sort of the, and forgive me, I'm trying to remember the sequence of events there, but essentially once this really gets going, that's when we would see something from the Department of Justice. As Barbara has laid out here, and as you said, Ellison, there was a period of time, and we went back and looked, right, when he got the target letter last time versus when that indictment came down and the motions went into place for that arraignment. The sort of wheels started turning there. It was like almost 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. So, you know, could we be looking at 3 weeks this time? Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. Who knows? What's interesting about that time frame is if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen here, Georgia election interference. There is a similar investigation happening in specifically the state of Georgia. The person running that investigation has said she would say whether or not Trump will be indicted in early August, right? First couple weeks in August, we think. Guess what? That's about 3 weeks away, Ellison. So there may be a convergence of things set to happen for Donald Trump right in the start of the Republican primary campaign season.
Barbara, pick up on that idea of the timeline and what we saw happen with the classified documents case. I mean, Hallie mentioned it was about 3 weeks to the day from when Trump received the target letter on May 19th to then when he was indicted. Should we expect that kind of timeline here, or do these just operate in completely different lanes?
Yeah, it may be different, but I would imagine that the next thing that would happen in this case is that the prosecutors would sort of wrap up their prosecution memo that they've probably been chipping away at over many months. If Donald Trump were to testify, they would want to include that in their prosecution memo. But after the expiration of these 4 days, if he does not come in and testify, they'd be able to wrap that up. And one of the things they need to do as a process point is they need to brief Attorney General Merrick Garland on the recommendations of Jack Smith. If he wants to propose an indictment, for example, he has to run that by Merrick Garland. And, you know, Jack Smith is special counsel, gets to make the decisions here. But under the special counsel regulations, the Attorney General can overrule him if he believes that what he proposes to do is so outside the boundaries of what the Justice Department ordinarily does. And so it's really just sort of an opportunity to reject the recommendation of Jack Smith, but only under very extraordinary circumstances. But I would expect that that process might take some time. That could be the 3 weeks that we saw in the Mar-a-Lago case. And you also, of course, have to go before the grand jury and present the indictment and get them to agree to return it. And so I could see that taking 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
All right, something to certainly keep an eye on. Hallie Jackson, Barbara McQuaid, thank you both for your insight and expertise. We really appreciate it. The efforts to overturn the 2020 election did not just happen at the U.S. Capitol. Activists also targeted state houses, and 16 people just got charged in Michigan for doing exactly that. The state's attorney general says this group showed up at the state house the day lawmakers certified the election and allegedly claimed they had to get inside the building to make sure the state's 16 electoral votes went to then President Trump. Here's an attorney trying to get them into that building.
Is there anyone here that is willing to allow us, I've got elected officials and electors, to deliver this to the Senate today at 2 p.m.
They were apparently fake electors, and all 16 are now facing several charges. One of those counts is conspiracy to commit forgery, and that could get them up to 14 years in prison. Here's the state's attorney general on why she pressed charges.
That the effort failed and democracy prevailed does not erase the crimes of those who enacted the false electors plot to overturn the election and circumvent the will of Michigan voters.
NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett joins us now. Maura, before we dive into these charges, let's understand exactly what these people allegedly wanted to do. What did they claim that day? And do we know why a person would have thought they could influence the election in this manner?
Well, listen, just for a little election 101 refresher, right? When it comes to any election, especially a presidential one, the voters go to vote, they go to the ballots, and they vote for who they want as president. And then technically the U.S. president is elected through a slate of electors that then go and cast their vote per state for the candidate that the popular vote selected. In this case, back in December of 2020, we all remember former President Donald Trump trying to overturn the results of the election, his allies readying these alternative slates of electors to go and cast their votes for him. And that's exactly what the Attorney General is alleging here in Michigan. Basically, as she laid it out, 16 people who are now charged with various counts of felonies tried to do exactly that. They went and, she said, covertly met in the basement of the Michigan Republican Party's office to sign certifications saying that they were, in fact, the electors. They tried to bring some of those documents to the state Senate so that it could go through that formal process, she says, but they were turned away. Some of those fake electors, we'll call them, then tried to take it to the U.S. Senate and the National Archives in hopes that former Vice President Pence would overturn the election. And that's how we came to be where we are today. And this is not something that just happened in Michigan. We're going to probably see this play out over several states, and that's what the special counsel is looking at in terms of this investigation into Trump as well. But this is the latest development, the newest development in terms of what we're seeing in Michigan, and the first time it appears that we're seeing charges in this fake elector scheme.
So, Mara, how did the Attorney General in Michigan come to the decision to charge these people? And if you can, break down what these charges are exactly.
So the Attorney General in Michigan released a video today breaking down exactly how she figured all of this out and how she chose to charge the way that they are. And she said that there's overwhelming evidence that these electors, as they called themselves, knew what they were doing knowingly, saying that they were falsely the electors, and they had intention behind it. She said that as they were certifying who they were, that was all a lie. And so that's why you see the counts laid out, 8 counts of various felonies for these 16 people. It ranges in terms of conspiracy theories conspiracy to commit election law, as well as different counts of forgery. And she didn't shy away from the fact that this is coming up against an election year. This is coming up in the shadow of various other investigations around the former president. And she acknowledged in the video today, I want to play you a bit of it, about how all this plays up against that political backdrop. Take a listen.
Undoubtedly, there will be those who claim these charges are political in nature. But where there is overwhelming evidence of guilt in respect to multiple crimes, the most political act I could engage in as a prosecutor would be to take no action at all.
Now, this all is unfolding in the last couple of hours. We haven't heard any updated reaction from defendants. The Michigan Republican Party also hasn't responded to our request. But we do know that in the past, several of these people who are now charged have said that they didn't know what they were signing when all of this happened back in December of 2020.
All right, NBC's Maura Barrett, thank you. An American soldier ran across the demilitarized zone into North Korea, and tonight the U.S. military is confirming his identity. NBC's Keir Simmons has more.
Tonight, the Army confirming American soldier Travis King is detained in North Korea after bolting across the border and effectively handing himself over to the regime run by Kim Jong-un. Washington racing to signal he was acting alone.
One of our service members who was on a tour willfully and without authorization crossed the military demarcation line.
2 U.S. officials telling NBC News he'd faced disciplinary action in South Korea and was supposed to be leaving the country. Another official said military police escorted him as far as they could go, an airport checkpoint. He then tagged along a commercial tour to the demilitarized zone and made the dangerous crossing.
He'll certainly be detained in that area initially and then probably taken to an interrogation facility.
We were in North Korea at the DMZ in 2017, seeing for ourselves the tense, militarized border.
And we're not allowed to stay here for very long.
A U.S. official tells NBC News escorts from the tour tried to chase the soldier but didn't catch him. In 2017, a North Korean soldier was shot multiple times as he dashed across the line to defect to the south. He had to be dragged in darkness to safety. That same year, U.S. hostage Otto Warmbier was released after 18 months detention. He was in a vegetative state and died soon afterwards, escalating tensions between the U.S. and North Korea. The two countries have been growing further apart, with Kim Jong-un testing ballistic missiles, one fired just tonight. Today's events risking adding to the diplomatic challenges at a difficult time.
That was Keir Simmons reporting. Still ahead, it is not cooling down anytime soon. 100 million Americans, yes, I said 100 million, are under heat alerts today. How they're beating the heat, coming up.
It feels a little hotter this year. It feels definitely, that the sun, it's burning, that you can cook an egg on a table that is sitting outside.
Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Airline pilots could start getting older. The House of Representatives is working on a bill to reauthorize the FAA, and right now they're considering raising the pilot retirement age from 65 to 67 years old. But pilots pilot unions are not on board. Today, police in Las Vegas raided a home connected to the murder of Tupac Shakur. Police didn't release a whole lot of details, but they do say it is part of the ongoing investigation. Tupac was shot in a drive-by shooting September 7, 1996. He died on the 13th. Someone just bought a first-generation iPhone still in its original packaging for more than $190,000 at auction. That's more than 300 times what it originally cost back in 2007. But this is not the first time one of these iPhones has gone for tens of thousands of dollars, but it more than doubles a record that was set in February with a sale of $63,000. Dallas emergency crews fought a massive fire at a church today. As many as 150 firefighters and 30 engines responded. Crews rotated in 15-minute shifts to put out the fire at the Saintsville Church of God. That's because Dallas is under an excessive heat warning, with some areas hitting 107 degrees. A group of teen boys worked together to save a dog hurt on a hiking trail. Otis collapsed on a trail in Utah. His owner, Brett Peterson, noticed his paws were bloody and he couldn't make the 4-mile trek back. Peterson and his son tried to use a tarp to carry their 80-pound dog, but they struggled to make it. That's when a group of boys hiking with their church banded together to save Otis. Good job, guys. In Bucks County, Pennsylvania, a community is still searching for those two missing toddlers. 2-year-old Matilda and her 9-month-old brother Conrad were swept away by the same flood that killed their mother. NBC's Emily Aketa has the latest.
Hey there. Well, today has really been the firmest acknowledgement from authorities that this is indeed a recovery mission. Police say that they are searching for, quote, 2 missing angels. 2-year-old Maddie Shields and her younger brother, 9-year-old Conrad, still missing after those dangerous and deadly floodwaters washed through Bucks County over the weekend. Authorities say they have searched the flood zone, about a 1.5-mile area, more than a dozen times. We've talked about the whole host of resources they have been pouring into that area: drones, dogs, boats, sonar technology, people on foot as well. Well, if by the end of tonight they do not find those 2 young children, they're going to be shifting their focus, largely winding down a large portion of those search operations, but focusing really purely on the water, using dive teams, a dive rescue mission, as they had phrased it. And they're going to be focusing on the creeks. They'll also continue to use cadaver dogs in that area. They're reminding people as the search continues to stay away from Washington Crossing Road, which over the weekend, that is where 11 vehicles were trapped by fast-moving floodwaters. They described it as a wall of water, according to authorities, saying that they could have done nothing. Those drivers could have done nothing to avoid the suddenness of the raging water. This is an area that is prone to flooding. There's the Delaware River not far away, plus other narrow creeks winding throughout the area in the town of Washington Crossing. Several people, authorities did manage to rescue several people, not only from the road, but also from the creek bed itself. But sadly, 32-year-old Katie Seeley and her 2 young children were not so lucky as they continue to search for those 2 young children. We heard from a family spokesperson just yesterday speaking to the devastation and the heartbreak that the surviving members of the family are now facing. 4 others also drowned in the weekend's wild weather. This has been a multi-agency search for those 2 young ones. At least 8 counties, authorities from 8 counties contributing, but really a somber note today as there's a shift in this search mission. Back to you.
You might have noticed it is hot. Today, more than 100 million people from coast to coast were under heat alerts. This unrelenting heat wave is breaking records just left and right, with several cities reporting triple-digit temperatures for days on end. And people are doing whatever they can to stay safe. One man in Florida is not messing around when it comes to staying hydrated.
How do you keep up with it here while you're working?
Drinking water, keeping hydrated all the time, you know. Water, Gatorades, 6 gallons a day. Yeah, you know, walking in this sun is not an easy task, you know, so you got to keep yourself hydrated.
In Phoenix, the extreme heat broke yet another record today when the temperature hit 110 degrees for the 19th straight day. That is the longest streak of temperatures reaching 110 ever recorded in the city. And Phoenix is where NBC's Aaron McLaughlin joins me now from. Aaron, what is it like in Phoenix right now? That city is used to heat, but not quite like this. How are people doing?
Hey, Allison. Well, it's extraordinarily hot here in Phoenix. Right now, it's about 114 degrees Fahrenheit where I am standing, and these temperatures are deadly. But what makes this current heat wave so extraordinary, as you pointed out, is the duration of the heat wave. The fact that this is the 19th day of 110 plus temps, and that is taking a toll in particular on vulnerable communities within Phoenix. There are people living in this city that do not have AC. Speaking to doctors, emergency rooms are full of patients suffering from the heat. Firefighters going from call to call. And here's the kicker. We do not know how long this current heat wave is going to last, Allison.
Aaron, we say it a lot these days. Heat is dangerous. It kills more Americans every year than any other weather-related event in this country. What do people need to know to stay safe?
Yeah, and it killed a lot of people here, right here in Maricopa County just last year, Ellison. More than 400 people died last summer due to heat. There are concerns that even more people could die this summer given the duration of these extreme temperatures. So doctors say there are some things you should be looking out for. You should look out if you have a headache, you have dizziness, you have nausea. That's when you really need to seek medical treatment. They're urging people to drink water. If you're having to work in these kinds of extreme conditions, they're recommending, according to the CDC, that you drink at least 24 ounces of water per hour. Hydration before work, during work seem as extraordinarily important, but the bottom line is the key advice is try to stay out of this heat and in an air-conditioned environment.
Aaron, before we let you go, I have to ask you, is it true that there are some people actually flocking to places like Death Valley where temperatures are through the roof because they want to experience the heat for themselves? That sounds crazy.
Yeah, they don't not only want to experience for themselves, they also want to get that selfie. Again, health experts saying, do not do that. Do not seek out these hot temperatures. They are deadly. Stay inside and stay away if you can.
Not a selfie worth having. Aaron McLaughlin, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Coming up, Illinois just became the first state to officially get rid of cash bail. We will explain why in a moment, but first, you gotta see this. Battling a rain delay during the San Francisco Giants series opener, the grounds crew rushed to cover the infield with tarp. But you'll see it in 1 second. It looks like they forgot one very important thing. Their coworker, that poor crew member, took a tumble and got swept up in the tarp tide. You can see him trying to crawl his way out from under, just like the parachute from Gym Clash. Remember those little rainbow things? He eventually escaped and the game continued. I really hope he was given at least one day off for that. Tough luck. All right, we will be right back. Welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. Former President Donald Trump might be looking at a third criminal indictment. He says he has received a second target letter from special counsel Jack Smith. Michigan's attorney general announced felony charges against 16 people, accusing them of trying to overturn the state's 2020 election results. And a U.S. soldier has been taken into custody in North Korea after he allegedly blended in with a group of tourists and then ran across the border from South Korea. For weeks now, police in Oregon have been trying to figure out if the dead bodies of 4 women are linked. And now it appears they may have found their answer. The bodies were all discovered earlier this year. And yesterday, investigators announced the 4 deaths were connected and that they have identified at least one person of interest. NBC's Stephen Romo has more.
Yeah, hey, Ellison, 6 women were discovered dead between February and May, all within the same 100-mile area around Portland. Now, that sparked fears about a serial killer. That's a term law enforcement, though, has not used in this case. In fact, police had said previously that these cases were not connected, but they're now saying they believe at least 4 of these may be linked. Now, let's take a look at that timeline. 22-year-old Kristen Smith was found dead in February. 24-year-old Charity Perry was found 2 months later in April. Then days days later, 31-year-old Bridget Webster was found dead. Just over a week after that, another victim, Ashley Rial, was found dead on May 7th. Another case in the same time span was an unidentified woman. Now, police later said foul play was not suspected there, but yet another case, 32-year-old Joanna Speaks, was also found dead in April. Investigators have not indicated Speaks' case is related to the other four, but her family is holding out hope for answers, saying in a statement yesterday, quote, "We are in direct communication with our detective to verify why our sister's name has not been linked to the person of interest along with four other girls as of this morning. We are extremely thankful, however, that we are one step closer to getting answers for the families." Now, Charity Perry's mom also spoke to our affiliate KGW about the anguish they're experiencing.
I'm doing better than I was the first week. I got my blood pressure a little more under control.
The DA's office points out no charges have been filed against anyone in these deaths, but they say they have identified a person of interest connected to the four cases, Smith, Perry, Webster, and Rial. They haven't released much information about that person of interest, though they do say they don't believe there is any active danger to the community right now. Ellison?
Stephen Romo, thank you. Illinois is set to become the first state in the country to fully eliminate cash bail. Today, its Supreme Court ruled the plan to do so is in fact constitutional, reversing a temporary pause put in place by the court earlier this year. NBC's Shaquille Brewster is following this for us very closely. Hey, Shaq.
Hi there, Ellison. Well, in just 60 days, Illinois will become the first state to completely abolish cash bail. The Illinois Supreme Court ruling this morning in a 5-2 decision that key provisions of the Safety Act involving pretrial detention are constitutional. What does this mean? Well, in just 60 days, so starting in September, if someone is accused and arrested of a crime, they no longer will need to pay a dollar amount in order to secure their release. Instead, judges will determine detention based on factors like if the defendant poses a threat or if they are a flight risk. This is a significant change in the criminal justice system here in Illinois. It was a major progressive priority. As many advocates have been saying, this will help reduce disparities and eliminate a wealth-based advantage in the criminal justice system. Listen to a little bit of what we heard from the chief public defender here in Chicago's Cook County.
The decision on who goes to jail or who doesn't will no longer rely on how much money your mother has or your partner has or your grandmother has or your church has or you have. This will literally return tens of millions of dollars to communities that need it most.
Now, opponents have said this law is dangerous and irresponsible. I want to read as part of a statement from the McHenry County State's attorney who was part of the lawsuit against this original law. He writes, "The implementation of the Safety Act will make the job of prosecutors, judges, and police more difficult. This law was part of a package of reforms that you saw pass after the murder of George Floyd and pushed by Governor J.B. Pritzker. While we have seen bail reform measures across the country before, notably in New Jersey and in Washington, D.C., none have gone this far. So that's something that we'll definitely be watching closely and something that many advocates and opponents will be taking a close look at, the impact that it ultimately has once it's fully implemented in September. Ellison?
Shaq Brewster, thank you. An insurance crisis is unfolding in a number of states. In Florida, for example, some homeowners' insurance companies are not renewing policies. Others are leaving the state altogether. NBC's Vicki Nguyen has more.
For hundreds of thousands of Florida homeowners, a Category 5 problem brewing for years is now taking aim at their sense of security as insurance companies decline future coverage or leave the state altogether. In the last 18 months, 15 insurers have stopped writing new policies. 3 have voluntarily withdrawn from the market, and 7 companies have been declared insolvent. The latest blow from AAA Insurance, which says it did not renew a very small percentage of higher exposure homeowners policies to ensure the company could support the large majority of our policyholders this hurricane season.
Completely out of the blue, I was surprised.
Some homeowners deemed high risk, like Walter Haller, received a short letter after seeing premiums rise for years.
And I wouldn't mind it going up again in that, but no, they just canceled me outright.
AAA giving Haller just one reason for being dropped.
Because of exposure management, they call it.
Industry insiders say increased hurricane risk, rising reinsurance rates, and a flood of lawsuits in Florida are forcing insurance providers out. In fact, Florida International University finance professor Shahid Hamid found insurance companies in the state have recently sustained more than $1 billion in net underwriting losses and say they haven't been profitable since 2016, all leading to less competition and more expenses for homeowners.
We've been in a crisis for quite a while. It means that the premiums will keep going up.
Natural disasters have wreaked havoc on insurance markets in other parts of the country, too, particularly in states like California, where wildfires led some companies to pull back on writing policies. And Colorado, with premiums jumping more than 50% over a 3-year period. In Florida, there's a backstop. The state-run Citizens Property Insurance, which offers similar rates to private insurers, but at least guarantees coverage. Anastasia Shellhouse had to scramble to secure Citizens Insurance after her policy was pulled.
I cannot take it anymore.
She says the pressure is overwhelming.
It's pushing people out of being able to afford to purchase their own homes. I know someone that almost foreclosed and they were forced to sell because their taxes and insurance went up so high. It's not realistic to continue.
Vicki Nguyen, NBC News.
Up next, despite the war, Ukraine has been able to export grains and food for a few months now. But that is all in doubt now. Russia backed out of the all-important grain deal, and it could become a big problem for the rest of the world. We'll explain next. Let's take a quick look around the world in 80 seconds. Russian forces retaliated after Ukraine allegedly attacked a bridge to the Crimean Peninsula. Earlier today, the Russians launched a series of attacks against the Ukrainian port city of Odessa. Authorities in Ukraine say they shot down 6 missiles and more than 24 drones. Israeli President Isaac Herzog visited the White House today. It was a key diplomatic gesture at a time when tensions between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's policies remain high. Nevertheless, Biden called the bond between the two countries, quote, simply unbreakable, and Herzog said the meeting was wonderful. China is also in the middle of a menacing heat wave. That's where U.S. climate envoy John Kerry is today, calling for action on climate change. But so far, China has resisted taking steps to curb its use of fossil fuels. It is the first time the world's 2 largest polluters spoke of climate change since China cut off talks after then-House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan last summer. And typos don't usually come with national security risks, but millions of emails intended for Pentagon employees were mistakenly sent to the West African country of Mali. The U.S. military owns the internet domain .mil, but the emails were instead sent to a domain in Mali, .ml. Some of those emails contain sensitive information related to national security. The U.S. is expected to announce another military aid package to Ukraine soon, this one totaling nearly $1.3 billion. The new package comes as more Russian strikes hit parts of southern and eastern Ukraine overnight, all while Russia has suspended the Black Sea grain deal, which was set up to help prevent a global food crisis. NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell has more.
To the dismay of U.S. and Western officials, Russia now has terminated a year-long grain deal, a deal which had allowed Ukrainian grain to get out through Russia's Black Sea embargo by ship, feeding sub-Saharan Africa, really the rest of the world. Ukraine has been known as the breadbasket of the world. And just since last August, 80 billion with a B loaves of bread were supplied by the grain that came through this passage, which was negotiated with the help of President Erdogan of Turkey, who has better relations with Russia than do the other NATO allies. So Russia had terminated it. The Russian officials said that this was not in retaliation for what they claim was Ukraine's underwater bombing of a critical bridge linking Russia to Crimea, to the land bridge between Russia and Crimea, which just happened the other day, that they had already contemplated terminating this grain deal. But at the same time, This has been criticized strongly by Secretary of State Tony Blinken and other officials because this basically feeds the world, and it will only increase global poverty, global hunger, and essentially raise food prices around the world. So it is a terrible blow. They are trying to renegotiate it. Turkey is again trying to intercede, but right now, very little hope of getting Russia to back down. Back to you.
Andrea Mitchell, thank you. At the border tonight, there are new allegations of mistreatment of migrants coming not from an immigrant or a human rights group, but from a Texas state trooper. He claims his superiors ordered him and other troopers to push migrants back into the Rio Grande. Here's the latest. Tonight, shocking allegations at the border after a Texas state trooper, who is also a medic, called the state's response to migrants inhumane. In an email to a Texas DPS sergeant that was obtained by NBC News and first reported by the Houston Chronicle, the state trooper claims he was ordered to withhold water from asylum seekers despite extreme heat and told to push small children and nursing babies back into the Rio Grande. Allegations that Texas DPS is calling outrageous, adding that troopers have to treat migrants who need medical attention. But those claims now reaching the White House.
If they are true, it is abhorrent, it is despicable, it is dangerous, and we're talking about the bedrock values of who we are as a country.
Among his concerns are the newly installed buoys that now line the middle of the Rio Grande, barrels wrapped in sharp wire that the trooper says has caused severe injuries. That makeshift wall is the latest effort by Governor Abbott's Operation Lone Star, which he says is an attempt to deter illegal immigration. But the trooper behind the email sent at the beginning of the month says that makeshift wall has caused deaths. In it, he includes photographs of some of the injuries, along with a list of gruesome incidents he says he witnessed along the Eagle Pass border during the last week of June. Among them, a 4-year-old passed out from exhaustion after being held back by wire and pushed by guards. A 19-year-old woman stuck in a wire while having a miscarriage. A father with a laceration to his leg after rescuing his son who was stuck on a barrel in the water, a barrel that was covered in wire. Migrants denied water. And the moment they encountered a group of 120 exhausted and hungry migrants with babies and children, the trooper says at one point he and other troopers were given orders to push the people back into the water to go to Mexico, something he says they refused to do. Texas DPS insisting there is not a directive or policy that instructs troopers to withhold water from migrants or push them back into the river. So these allegations are related to the state of Texas's actions at the border, but the federal government also weighing in here. In a statement from the Department of Homeland Security, they said in part, quote, "This report is troubling and, if true, is cruel and inhumane. Enforcing immigration law is a federal authority, and DHS continues to prioritize the well-being of those we encounter and those in our custody through the implementation of our plan to safely and humanely manage the southwest border." Before we go, it's time for the future of everything. And tonight we are taking a closer look at the booming electric car market in China. Plus, when you hear the word influencer, you probably think of someone in their teens or their 20s. Well, now some companies are shaking things up and reaching out to an older generation for influence.
I don't mind doing crazy, zany things, and I think a lot of young people like the idea of a grandma who's like running around the backyard in a turkey costume.
In tonight's Future of Everything, we're diving into the future of road travel. And when it comes to manufacturing electric vehicles, the traditional rivalries between automakers are going totally out the window. Japan and Germany are not the biggest competitors to American companies like Tesla, GM, and Ford. It is actually China. NBC's Janice Mackey-Freyer is there with the details.
In the world's largest market for electric vehicles, this is a glimpse at the future. At Shanghai's International Auto Show this year, the heavyweights aren't GM or Ford.
It's massive improvement in terms of the user experience.
They're Chinese brands like BYD, Li Auto, Xpeng, and Zeekr, making sleek-looking cars that are high-tech and affordable.
When you drive a Chinese vehicle today, it's far different than 10 years ago. They are better built, and the quality overall is much more competitive with what you would see from a U.S. automaker or from a European brand.
Foreign automakers, including American brands, are now paying attention to Chinese players like BYD. It's #1 in China. And the competition is now so intense, it sparked an EV price war here.
NIO cut its prices by nearly 10% on all models. Competition is fierce, says CEO William Li. You can be ahead today, but not in a few months. The boom in electric vehicles is why China is now the largest auto exporter in the world, tripling in just 5 years to overtake Japan. That's thanks largely to sales in Europe, as most major Chinese brands aren't yet available in the U.S. due to tariffs put in place during the Trump administration.
Any vehicle built in China and exported to the United States comes with a 25% tax on it. That just makes those vehicles far more expensive, and it's hard for them to be competitive here in the U.S.
China's growth in EVs is what some experts call a Chinese storm in the global industry.
It's surprising that what we felt is coming is actually really coming, and it's true.
China leads the EV race in part because it controls the supply chain of raw materials for batteries. 28% of the world's lithium, 41% of cobalt, through stakes in mines on 5 continents. China also dominates processing for battery components.
Then release the brake?
Yes.
And it just takes over.
Government subsidies keep the industry charged too. And China is now also restricting exports of some key metals in an escalating tech war with the U.S. Right now, Chinese EV companies are scaling up and going global. The challenge for automakers everywhere will be keeping up. Janice Mackey-Freyer, NBC News, Hefei, China.
And this last story is proof that TikTok tricks are not just for kids. NBC News Now anchor Savannah Sellers tells us about the latest batch of social media creators over the age of 50 who are making the app more accessible for older generations.
So if you've been scrolling through your social media, you might have seen older creators popping up more frequently on your feed. Well, experts say brands are now aligning themselves with influencers above the age of 50 in order to stand out. But for TikTok creators like Lynn Davis, it's all about authentic self-expression.
We're creative, too. It smells great.
You may know Lynn Davis from her cooking videos, or recognize one of her signature catchphrases.
Let's see if it's bussin' or not.
Initially, the woman behind the wildly entertaining TikTok account @CookingWithLinja didn't understand the social media hype.
Do you remember when you first heard about TikTok?
I thought it was so crazy. I'm going, why are people so drawn to, people dancing and doing silly things?
But when COVID hit, she and her son Tim, a videographer, found themselves with some spare time on their hands.
They're not just cooking videos. There's something really special about what you do in your videos.
I think a lot of our appeal is Tim's videography and editing, how entertaining he makes, and the special effects. I think people are really drawn to that.
It's me,
the grilling grandma.
The page's signature style has attracted more than 16 million followers in the last 3 years.
Lynn, what's it like to be TikTok famous?
Once in a while, I'll get recognized at the grocery store or in the airport.
What's it like to get to do this with your son?
Oh, it has made us so close. I think of him as a confidant. It's just been a wonderful and marvelous thing.
Lynn is not the only creator working with their children. Fashion influencer Jim Tan started her page @CaliforniaIsTooCasual with her daughter Mia's encouragement.
She just said, "Oh my God, Mom, I love the way you dress. My friends always comment about how stylish your mom is. Why don't you just post an outfit of the day? You can do that in your sleep."
Just a year and a half later, she has nearly 250,000 followers and more than 4.1 million likes on TikTok.
Okay, go off, queen.
And at age 62, Jim is getting calls for partnerships with brands marketed towards younger audiences.
I wore a dress that maybe people might not think is something a 62-year-old would gravitate towards, but there's no clothing tags that say this is only for 25 to 35.
And she's not alone. According to a New York Times report, the past 18 months have seen an increase in the popularity of older TikTok creators.
Here's a woman who's more mature, but her attitude is very youthful. And the reality of the situation is that the older demographic has a lot of money to spend, and there's very few brands that are talking to us.
And people like Jim and Lynn have been able to make a business out of filling that gap.
Why do you think your videos caught on in such a huge way?
I don't mind doing crazy, zany things. And I think a lot of young people like the idea of a grandma who's like running around the backyard in a turkey costume.
And you're getting paid for it. Do you remember the first sponsorship you got?
Oh, the first thing we got for free was an air fryer. That air fryer is in a lot of our videos still. He has big googly eyes on him.
Lynn doesn't always take on brand partnerships, but one thing she constantly agrees to.
When someone asks you for a selfie, what do you think?
Oh, I always say yes.
Okay, they were so much fun to talk to, and it looks like this shift into older creatives is here to stay. Jim, who you just heard from, is part of something called the Sephora Squad. That's sort of like the Amazon influencer program, but for people of all ages who want to develop their skills as content creators. Back to you.
Savannah Sellers, thank you. That does it for us tonight. I'm Ellison Barber. We will see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.